Growing up, I was taught that grit and hard work were the keys to success. It's a nice idea, but I came to learn that it's not that simple. As the saying goes, genius is evenly distributed. Opportunities are not. I'll never forget reading the book Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell back when I was in high school. My microeconomics teacher recommended it to our class. The book gave me clear language and examples to debunk the myth that an individual's success is solely their own making. Other factors play a big role, and not just the ones we typically associate with privilege, like race, zip code, economic status, less obvious ones too. And recently, Malcolm Gladwell revisited one of the key concepts from Outliers in an episode of his podcast, Revisionist History. When our team heard the story, it really got us thinking, and it led to a great discussion. So we decided to devote an episode of PS Weekly to share it with you. We'll try to do this from time to time, sort of like a podcast discussion club kind of vibe. I don't want to share any spoilers, so we better get to it. Today, we'll be playing excerpts from Outliers Revisited, and then stick around for a behind-the-scenes conversation with two revisionist history producers who spoke to our student reporter, Fredlove Deshommes. I'm Sabrina Duquesne, passing it to the OG, Malcolm Gladwell.
In the middle of our preparations for Season 7 of this, your favorite podcast, the Revisionist History team got on a train to Philadelphia, 4 of us, carrying props, recording equipment, and extra microphones. Our destination, the Gothic ivy-covered cathedral of higher learning that is the University of Pennsylvania. And why did we go? Because we had cooked up a little experiment, and we were curious to see how it would fly.
Thank you. Welcome to Fredlove. Thank you.
We commandeered one of the main lecture halls at the Wharton School, invited 75 or so students, all seniors, smart, focused, disciplined, future masters of the universe, and asked them to answer 10 simple questions, such as, how many years of your K-12 education were a public school, and how many were a private school? At the time of your graduation from high school, how many continents had you visited? At any point during your middle school and high school years, did your parents provide you with a private tutor?
How you doing today, Mr. Gladwell?
Pretty good. Enjoying myself. I looked out at rows and rows of eager students, hunched over their desks in anticipation, took a deep breath, and began. So my name is Malcolm Gladwell. I am the host of the podcast Revisionist History. The theme of this season of Revisionist History is experiments. And one of the experiments of this season involves all of you. So you guys are guinea pigs? Yes, guinea pigs. Because in the manner of all guinea pigs, they were entirely in the dark about what we had in store for them. And as you probably guessed from some of the questions that you were given, what I'm trying to do is I'm conducting an experimental investigation into the nature of the privilege of the people in this room. The students quickly finished the questionnaires and put their names and birth dates at the top. My producers, Eloise and Harrison, are sitting at a big table at the front of the room in full view of all the guinea pigs. They go through the completed questionnaires, one by one, and use the answers to generate a number, a score, which they write on a giant white sticker with a big fat Sharpie. And now the real experiment begins. I'm going to assign every one of you a number. If they can figure out what their number means, they will understand something essential about how broken the system was that propelled them to the Ivy League, and how to fix it. Just peel off the back, and I'd like you to affix the sticker to your chest so we can all see each other's numbers. You're going to look around the room, see everyone else's numbers, see your number, and hopefully that will aid you in your investigation of what exactly the nature of this experiment is. I'll just read... The students sat there with their numbers stuck to their chests, looking around in befuddlement, trying to make sense of everyone's score. I tried to help them figure it out, gave them hints, nudges. think about this. I gave you a series of questions. Some of those questions involved a yes or no answer. So you saw two people, Eloise and Harrison, who quite quickly, in the space of about 5 minutes, 10 minutes, went through 75 or so responses and were able to very quickly and easily assign you a number. So think about this logically. It wasn't a complex algorithm, right? There was no computer used. Eloise, how long would you say you were spending, and Harrison, how long would you spending on each questionnaire?
6 seconds.
5, 6 seconds. Okay, that's a clue, guys. Let's go. Come on.
Hi, my name is Abe. They might have just looked at zip code because that's a pretty good predictor of privilege just in and of itself.
Abe has derived his hypothesis from question 6. What is the zip code your family lived in during your high school years? Perhaps, he speculates, the number on his chest was some kind of complex, mysterious derivative of his zip code.
I didn't see if you had a computer, but if you did...
There was no... Eloise, was there a computer?
No, I did have to use a calculator 1 or 2 times.
Calculator. Abraham, with all due respect, are you suggesting that Eloise and Harrison had memorized every zip code?
It's plausible.
They're very smart. Yeah. Not that smart.
I'm Zach. I think it really has to do strictly with the private versus public education system in the U.S.
Nope, that's not what we were looking for.
Hi, my name is Joseph. A question that I thought was very interesting on there was about if you have any siblings, and if so, how many?
Nope, not that either.
Hi, I'm Kaylee. One that I don't think I've ever been asked in relation to this was if I drank when I was in high school, what age that I get drunk at.
Kaylee's referring to question number 9. In high school, did you drink alcohol? And if yes, when did you first get drunk? Could you come up with any reason why I would have asked that question, or do you think that's just one of the ones that I'm just blowing smoke on?
I have my own hypothesis, but I can't.
Oh, come on.
What if I'm wrong?
This is all about being wrong. Oh, this is all about being wrong. Once upon a time, in 2008, I wrote a book called Outliers, the first chapter of which was devoted to a phenomenon discovered in the 1980s by the Canadian psychologist Roger Barnsley. Here's some of what I wrote. The explanation for who gets to the top of the hockey world is a lot more interesting and complicated than it looks. Good Lord. I do not sound like I'm enjoying reading my own book. Listening to this part of the Outliers audiobook now, I'll admit I have some regrets about that chapter. We'll get to that, I promise. Anyway, it occurred to me, as I planned our trip to Philly, that I should talk to Barnsley again and go over his discovery one more time. Make sure I understood everything. So I called him up and asked him to retell the story of how, in the early 1980s, he and his wife Paula stumbled upon what has come to be known as the relative age effect.
We were living in Lethbridge, Alberta, and we went to a junior A hockey team. It was the Lethbridge Broncos at that time.
Barnsley's wife Paula started reading the game program, which had the rosters of both teams listed in it.
Paula said over to me, "Roger, when do you think all these hockey players were born?" And I remember thinking to myself, well, that's kind of a silly question. So I did a quick calculation. I said, Paula, their average age 18. It's about 1982, so they're probably all born in around 1964. And she said, no, I'm not talking about the year. I'm talking about the month. And I said, what are you talking about? And she opened up the page of the program where they had listed the roster of the team, and it just jumped out at us, that the majority of these players were January, February, and March, and then you seem to get the odd April and May and very few in the fall. And I said, my goodness, that's just remarkable.
He went home and expanded his search further. Everywhere he looked in competitive hockey, same thing. For some reason, most players were born in the first part of the year.
And that's when that famous 40, 30, 20, 10 by the quarters of the year showed up.
The famous 40-30-20-10 phenomenon that he's talking about is what, in Outliers, I referred to as the iron law of Canadian hockey. Quote, in any elite group of hockey players, the very best of the best, 40% of the players will have been born between January and March, 30% between April and June, 20% between July and September, and 10% between October and December. End quote. Now, why is this? It's because Canada is obsessed with hockey, and coaches start picking players for all-star traveling squads at the age of 9 or 10. Since the eligibility cutoff for Canadian hockey is January 1st, that means the coaches are choosing among 9-year-olds who are as much as 12 months apart. And 12 months age difference at the age of 9 is a lot. The January kids are bigger and stronger and more coordinated than the December kids, which means that the January kid is more likely to be chosen by the coaches for the traveling squad, which means, in turn, that they will practice 2 or 3 times as often, play more games, have better coaches, better competition than the kids left behind. And what began as a completely arbitrary advantage based on a quirk of birthdays turns over time into a real advantage.
So this is the relative age effect in a nutshell. The concept that your birth date can either advantage you or disadvantage you relative to your peers. And these relative advantages are not just confined to sports. They show up in education too. Think about it. Some students start kindergarten at age 5 years and 364 days old. Others start at 5 years and 1 day old. That's about a 20% difference in the amount of life lived. So it makes sense that the older kids in the grade are more likely to be seen as advanced and selected for programs like Gifted and Talented. That early head start can compound over the years into a full-blown privilege. We're going to fast forward in the episode to get back to the UPenn campus experiment and see how it turns out.
Turn over your pieces of paper. Just put your name at the top. And once you're finished, we will collect them. And then we will commence the exercise. So, we give out our elaborate questionnaire. But secretly, all we're interested in is people's birthdays. And then Eloise and Harrison go through each questionnaire and use the birthdays to do a simple calculation. Technically, the youngest you could be as a college senior at the time of our experiment was to be born in September 2001. So if you were born then, you got a 0. 0 birth privilege. If you were 1 month older, born in August 2001, you got a 1. July 2001, you got a 2, and so on. The higher the number on the sticker, the older the student wearing it. We even had a contingency for students who might have skipped a grade somewhere along the way. You'd get a negative number if you were younger than the expected age of a college senior. First thing we found out, there were no negative numbers in the room. Back when I was in college, I knew dozens of people who had skipped grades. Apparently, that doesn't happen much anymore. But it was worse than that. There's no zeros. Does anyone a 1? 2. Any 2s? 3s? 4s? 5s? Anyone less than 10? Stand up. One student finally stood up in the back row, a college senior who was a few months shy of her 22nd birthday.
10.
Oh, you're a 10? Oh, a 10 in the back row. Oh, another 10 emerges. We've got the 12, we've got these 12s, and we've got some 10s. Take a look. This is bananas. This is as bad as the Canadian national junior hockey team. In our sample of students from one of the world's most selective universities, there were no young seniors. None, not even close. There was no one at all who had been born in 2001, which is the year you would expect most seniors to be born in. At one point, a student started talking about her experience in a Gifted and Talented program. So I asked for a show of hands. Do you mind me asking, how many of you guys were in Gifted and Talented programs? Wow, basically all of you. Which makes sense, right? These were a group of relatively old students, and being relatively older makes it more likely to get into a Gifted and Talented program. And getting into a Gifted and Talented program makes it more likely to get into a school like Penn, which is why a group of seniors that day at Wharton were all really old. What begins as arbitrary advantage hardens into privilege. A simple fact about their own success that our students still hadn't figured out. I'm going to give you another clue, guys. The particular dimension of privilege we're interested in measuring, I'm going to say with a great deal of certainty, is in this room the most significant form of privilege or lack of it that you would have experienced as students. At this point, I've pulled out all the stops, trying to help them. I've had people with the highest numbers stand up. At one point, I made everyone with a number over 20 get up from their seats and line up against the wall. They were still guessing, but it was like they were throwing darts with a blindfold on.
There were pretty clear demographic similarities at the top end of the spectrum. Racially was the most obvious in my eyes. Yeah. Okay. But also just in general that there were very few at the low end of the spectrum. Yeah. Was also noteworthy.
How do you feel about being in the higher number group as opposed to the lower number group?
I mean, it's just a fact. Like it is. Oh. It's I would say I'm coming into it. I'm aware of my privilege as a white woman, but I think it's about what you do with that privilege that's important.
And then, after 40 minutes of floundering in the shallow end of the revisionist history research pool, a group of students in the front row put their heads together and then raised their hands.
We have a hypothesis.
That's Adam. Everyone in this front row group had the highest privilege score we handed out. 24 plus. Of course they figured it out first. They were the oldest students in the class. Next to Adam was Joseph. He was wearing a suit and a tie.
Yeah, we have a hypothesis, 24 plus, is that a significant factor here is age, our absolute age. Yes. Like, how old are you?
Because we're all a bunch of old seniors over here. Yeah. Older than usual. Yeah.
Eureka! Phase 1 of the experiment was over. Now, phase 2. Because I intended to ask them if they wanted to do something about their arbitrary privilege.
Skipping ahead one more time.
Now, would you feel comfortable with all of your, if you go back to your K through 12 experiences, would you feel comfortable if they ran all of your test scores through an age correction algorithm? Around the room, I saw young people of promise, focused, eager. They would be my disciples. I was so full of excitement, I put the question to a vote. Yes or no? I say, do a show of hands. Who likes the idea? There was a great stirring and rustling. My heart leapt into my throat. I thought I had brought the birthday rights revolution into the heart of the lion's den. I looked up, looked around, and nothing. No roar of support. Only a long, cold silence. I've never seen less enthusiasm for a great idea in my life. Wait, what is the matter with you guys? A young man spoke up first.
Well, it's like, to be completely honest, it's to be selfish about it. It would probably have hurt our chances of being right here in this room because I'm old for my grade. I did well on my standardized test scores. Maybe if they readjusted it, I would have been more in the median.
He was a 22-year-old senior in college.
So selfishly, I would say, no, it's not a good idea. From a societal standpoint, perhaps.
So you're being honest.
I'm being honest, yeah. It's like saying, legacy admissions or something like that. My father went to Penn and my mother went to Penn.
Oh, you're drowning in privilege.
Exactly, I'm drowning in privilege.
Did you...
Yes. If we get rid of this, but I'm just going to be honest.
That's fantastic. Who else wants to... Then Matteo raises his hand. He is an 18 on his sticker, an age privilege advantage of a year and a half.
And I think that's a poor idea because it assumes that everyone who is older is always going to be smarter and everyone who's younger is always going to be less smart. I've seen some pretty old people do some terrible things.
No, Matteo, that's not what it does.
Well,
it's neutral. It just adjusts for the age gradient.
But I want my score to be my score.
But wait, can I just harp on that? You said you want your score to be your score.
Yeah.
But why is an adjusted score, a score that accounts for your degree of maturity, somehow less characteristic of who you are than an unadjusted score? I would have thought the opposite. A score that doesn't include information on your level of maturity would seem to be more artificial than one that does.
I don't know. I guess I would want to look at the algorithm before I made an actual judgment, because I'd be surprised if I was okay with everything, like theoretically, everything that the algorithm would say.
The students stood up one by one, using their prodigious powers of analysis and imagination to come up with one objection after another. Why do you think you guys are so hostile to attempts to remedy the situation?
My fear with the algorithm is that it could be gamed. So if this were implemented where we know that if you're younger, you get, say, a 100-point bump in the SAT or are viewed more favorably throughout your whole educational career, then we're probably sending our kids off to kindergarten at 4. Or we're planning, whenever we have our kids, looking at whatever the cutoff date is for kindergarten, in September maybe, and saying, all right, we're going to reproduce 9 months before that, in December or January.
Yeah, but wait, it's the current system that's being gamed. We're responding to the gaming, are we not?
Yeah, so I guess the fear is that the algorithm could be regamed.
Yeah.
And yes, exactly.
I put my hand on the table to steady myself. My head was spinning. These were the children of Outliers. Children raised according to the rules of a game I kind of helped set in motion. And now, the consensus among 75 elderly Ivy Leaguers was that the system should remain rigged in favor of the elderly. The apple cart must remain upright, with the shiniest and oldest apples on the top. Now, do I blame them? No, I don't. This is what happens when we give up on fairness as an essential principle. All that remains is cynicism. The students at Penn do not see the point of changing the system because their parents did not see the point of changing the system. And their parents didn't see the point because the schools didn't see the point. And the schools, for goodness sake, can't even rise from the slumber of their indifference to see that it makes no sense to give everyone an assessment test on the same day. We game the things that we've given up on. I tried my best in Outliers, but I subtitled the book The Story of Success, and if I learned anything from that afternoon at Penn, it's that we want to think about success as a word to describe ourselves, our own progress. But it's not really people who are successful. It's the systems around us. Great students and great hockey players come from great teams and great classrooms. And if you want to judge the success of those teams and classrooms, start by looking at their composition. Like, when was everyone born? And if we can't get that one right, God help us with everything else.
So now that you're all thinking about your age in a new way, trying to make sense of how you've been advantaged or disadvantaged your whole life and didn't even know it, we're taking you behind the scenes to hear from 2 revisionist history producers who helped make the show.
My name is Eloise. I am one of 4 producers, is that rightly? 4 producers on Revisionist History. This is my 3rd season.
My name is Mengistu, and I'm a producer on Revisionist History as well, and have also been working on it for the past 3 seasons.
Our student reporter, Fredlove Deshommes, takes it from here.
Well, you guys called the episode Outliers Revisited. Is there any particular reason why you guys revisited it?
One of the reasons Malcolm decided to revisit it is because he realized that his theory in Outliers sort of set off an unintentional trend among people trying to sort of take advantage of age as a sort of like privilege in the education system.
How did you guys come up with the idea to do an experiment at a college?
I think that was one of, go ahead.
I think the original idea was to look at students earlier, like much younger students, to see that phenomenon happen within younger children. But then he just happened to be good friends with the teacher at Penn, Wharton Business School at Penn. And they, I think, chatted amongst themselves and thought it would be a good idea to have a little crossover.
Were you two there?
Yes.
Yeah, we were both there. Yeah, that was one of those pitches that Malcolm had at the very beginning of the season when we sat down and talked about ideas. He said, I want to revisit this idea I talked about in Outliers. What if we go to an elementary school? And we sort of said, well, it's hard. It's, as I'm sure you guys know, there's a lot involved when you interview kids, and you have to sort of be really careful. And also we wanted to see how far this theory trickled up, I guess. And so we decided to go to a college instead of an elementary school. But the basic pitch was Malcolm's at the beginning.
Did it surprise you that none of the students wanted to change or remedy the relative age effect?
I don't know. I guess if I was in their position, I think from the outside, it's easy to say that it's something that we should fix. But yeah, I guess I was a little surprised in the moment. But then once I put myself in their shoes, it kind of makes sense that you wouldn't want to fix a system that you're benefiting from. But yeah, I think I was a little bit surprised.
Do you see any parallels in society where people have an advantage with privilege and don't want to change that?
Oh, of course. Yeah, I think that's basically, the world that we live in, unfortunately. And I think that's kind of where we land in the episode, that it's one thing to be aware of what systems are in place, but then it's definitely another thing to actually have the impetus or the motivation to actually do something about it. And of course, people in positions of power are a lot less likely to give that up.
How do you think we can account for intersectional compounding factors when trying to dismantle the system?
That's a really good question.
I mean, I think the first step is just acknowledging all the different sort of things at play that put certain people at different advantages and other people at disadvantages. And often they work sort of together. So when you're talking about somebody's socioeconomic status and thinking about relative age, some people can afford to hold their children back and, they have somebody to stay at home versus, some people can have to send their child to school and they don't really have a choice. So that's a pretty unique way that these two things overlap. I think what we hope with a podcast episode is that we'll get people thinking about these things and caring about them enough that they'll want to make a change. And then that's actually the hard part is which is your question, which is how do we dismantle these structures? But I mean, hopefully it's people like you and people that listen to the podcast that will take that on. I think that's our hope.
What were some of the responses that you got from this episode?
Oh, wow. Mixed results. I think a lot of people, just as Malcolm fans, were really excited that he was, attacking a piece of work that to them is pretty important. I think some people were confused by the concepts and the methodology of how we collected the samples and maybe wanted more information. But I think for the most part, it's been interesting to see people's reaction to knowing that there's another level of privilege on top of the ones that we're so familiar with.
Right now, there's a big debate about merit. For example, the chancellor recently decided that middle school students who get the best grades should have first pick of the top high schools. In light of your work, what do you think about these sorts of merit-based rewards in a public school system?
I think that's definitely a case for where, this methodology might be helpful in kind of adding that context that, yes, of course, some kids are excelling in certain ways, but I definitely want to know where they are on the calendar.
Yeah. I think anytime also you try and measure a student, it becomes complicated, whether it's a standardized test or their grades, because you're losing the full picture of the person. And that can sort of create a class of people that are similar in like sort of the invisible ways that we're talking about. So maybe it creates a class of people that are all born in August. And I don't think it's ever good to have a group of people who aren't exposed to like people in different, situations. So I'm not sure how I feel about merit-based system.
I'm curious if you guys have any thoughts on the concept of ageism. Being older, you're often automatically viewed as better. How can we create a system in which younger people are given the same opportunities as their counterparts, while also diminishing the negative connotation we as a society associate with young people?
Yeah, I find that interesting. Even, our team is, I think, made up of people who are different ages. And I think it's a matter of, issuing the same respect that you would to a younger person that you would to somebody who's a bit older, and giving them the same amount, at least, and this is just speaking about, the workplace, of, giving everybody equal time, at least to respond to things and contribute their ideas. But I think maybe that needs to extend to, decisions like the chancellors that you were talking about, that children or people who are actually being affected by things like this should also have like an equal voice in the policy.
Any final thoughts for the listeners?
I mean, I hope this episode is, helpful, or, at least provides context for people, for kids who may have always had like that lingering question in the back of their minds that why is everybody a little bit quicker than me, especially in their younger years. And I think, I hope it helps people just find that comfort and that knowledge that it's not just you, maybe it is you. It was just when you were born, it's something you completely can't help, just like a lot of factors.
Yeah, I hope that people listening have these same types of conversations, with their friends, especially young people that are experiencing it, and sort of debate the exact questions that you're asking us. I think anybody who listens to the episode would be able to have an opinion and sort of answer and talk about. So I think that's my hope for people who listen.
That's all the questions I have for you guys. Thank you for letting me interview you.
Thank you so
for
much.
asking such thoughtful questions.
They're really thoughtful questions.
So listeners, what do you think of all this? Have you benefited from the relative age effect? Have you thought about how it impacts education? Email us your thoughts at podcast@bellevoices.org, or drop us a message on social media @MisEducationPod. You can listen to Revisionist History wherever you get your podcasts. The episode you heard today, Outliers Revisited, is number 7 in the latest season. We want to thank Eloise Lynton and Lee Mengistu for spending some time with us. Thanks also to Maggie Taylor from Pushkin Industries. Miseducation is a production of The Bell. Our work here is made possible in part by the Summerfield Foundation, the Pinkerton Foundation, and FJC. This episode was reported by Fredlove Deshommes and produced by Taylor McGraw with help from Mira Gordon. Music in this episode came from Blue Dot Sessions. I'm your host, Sabrina Duquesne. We'll be back next Monday. Talk to you then.